No crust, overcooked at the edges, and still raw in the center. Tender as shoe leather. It's a complete disaster, right? So today we are talking all about the most common mistakes you make when cooking steak, from picking the wrong cut of meat to covering the steak after cooking. Let's go! Picture this. You have just come back from the store, super excited with a fresh steak in your hand. You can't wait to throw it on the grill, expecting a mouth-watering, medium-rare steak with a perfect crispy crust. But the end result? This. Hit that like button if you can relate. In fact, this was the story of my life for the first couple of years of my relationship with steaks, before I realized that I was doing something wrong. One of the biggest discoveries for me was how the lid can affect the end result. This simple action can surprisingly affect your steak, but before we go into that, let's take a look at other common grilling mistakes. Mistake number 1. Choosing not right type of cut. First of all, you need to understand that different type of cuts may require different cooking techniques. You are not going to cook skirt steak the same as you cook ribeye, aren't you? Here I have grass-fed ribeye. It doesn't even a select grade. There is almost zero marbling. It is super thin, like less than 1 inch. And here I have ribeye prime. Look at this marbling. On a charcoal grill, thin steaks can get too cooked and dry real quick because of the high heat. Plus, they don't stay on the grill long enough to pick up that great smoky flavor. Also, you can't use the two-step grilling trick, searing first and then cooking on a cooler spot, because thin steaks might get overcooked during searing itself. Marbling in steak, the little white spots of fat within the meat, is a big deal for a couple of key reasons. As the steak cooks, this fat melts, enhancing the steak's rich flavor and keeping it juicy, so it doesn't dry out during cooking. This melting fat also contributes to the tenderness of the steak. But there is another awesome thing this fat does. It helps form a delicious crust on the steak when heated. The marbled fat enhances the Maillard reaction, a process that creates a browned, flavorful crust. So that marbling is pretty much doing all the magic when you cook a steak. The mistake number 2, not letting the steak come to room temperature. Hold on. I'm kidding. This is not a mistake. The idea that you need to let a steak sit at room temperature for 20 to 30 minutes before grilling is a common myth. And it's time we bust it once and for all. Who even came up with this? First off, for a thick cut of steak to reach room temperature, it could take several hours, not just 20-30 minutes. Moreover, it doesn't make much of a difference whether you bring the steak to room temperature or not, especially when grilling on a charcoal grill. So the truth is, you don't need to let your steak sit out before you grill it. Alright, the next mistake is overcrowding the grill. I use a very simple rule. Each steak has to be located right above the coal baskets. We are searing the steaks, and for searing we need direct heat. Otherwise, when you put too many steaks in the grill, you will have to toss them back and forth. You will not be able to fully control the searing process. As a result, you will have steaks that will be cooked unevenly, uneven doneness and uneven crust on the steak. So basically it depends on the size of your steaks. If we talk about standard ribeye size, so you can use 2 or 3 steaks simultaneously, again, so that they can be located right above the coal baskets. In this case you will be able to sear them evenly and then put them to the low and slow grilling zone. But if you want to cook more steaks for your family and friends and you have some kind of weekend barbecue, so you have only one option. You can cook portion by portion. So you cook 2 or 3 steaks at first and then you cook 2 or 3 steaks more. But honestly, one standard ribeye around 1.5 or 2 inches thick weighs around 1 pound or even more. So you can cook 2-3 steaks and it will be enough for everyone. But me personally, I can eat such steak by myself easily, cause I really like meat and steaks. And the mistake number 3 is cutting into the steak to check doneness. Another common mistake comes from not realizing that cooking steaks is both an art and science. When you don't fully understand how to cook steaks or the different degrees of doneness, you might end up taking shortcuts. I used to do this myself. I'd slice into the steak just to check if it was cooked the way I liked it. When you cut into a steak to check its doneness, you are essentially creating a pathway for the juices within the steak to escape. These juices are what keep the steak moist and flavorful. By cutting into a steak prematurely, you risk losing some of that delicious juice, which can result in a drier and less flavorful steak. And if you are going to put the steak into the grill after you cut it and cook it for several more minutes, congratulations, it would be better for you to become a vegetarian, so that I can get more meat. This mistake typically goes hand in hand with the next mistake. Mistake number 4. Not resting the steak after cooking. Resting steak after grilling is important for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it helps retain the juices within the meat, resulting in a juicier and more flavorful steak. When you cook steak, the heat causes the juices to move towards the center. By allowing it to rest, the juices redistribute throughout the steak, enhancing its taste. Secondly, resting allows the muscle fibers to relax, making the steak more tender. This phase known as carry over cooking. Lastly, resting allows the temperature to even out within the steak, ensuring a consistent and evenly cooked piece of meat. So next time you grill a steak, remember to let it rest for a few minutes before cutting into it to enjoy the best possible flavor and texture. Okay everyone, let's get into the big one. The mistake that can really mess up your grilling. Always covering your grill with a lid. I know it seems harmless, but it's a fast track to ruining the perfect crispy steak crust. When I first started grilling, I thought the lid was a lifesaver. I mean, it felt like it was there to help, right? Need a well done steak without any stress? Put the lid on. Something's starting to smoke or char? Just cover it up, close the vents and problem solved. I was scared of the open flame and thought that there was no way steaks were supposed to be cooked that way. Oh boy, I was wrong. The moment I figured out that you can cook a steak over the open fire without any issues, it was a game changer for me. Now you might think, the grill has a lid, so I should use it, right? But let me ask you this. Would you put a lid on a pan when you are frying a steak? You might think you are doing your steak a favor by locking in the heat, turning your grill into an oven. But in reality, it is the quickest way to overcook your steak and miss out on that perfect crust. Leave the lid and give your steak the freedom it needs. The best way to grill your steak is to start with the lid off. This allows you to sear the steak right over the heat, creating that delicious crust. But make sure you keep an eye on it to prevent burning. Once you've got the crust, you can close the lid for a bit to let the steak cook evenly. But be careful, the goal is to keep the steak juicy, not dry it out. The secret to the perfect steak is balancing between using and not using the lid. So avoid the mistake of leaving the lid closed all the time. Your steak will thank you. And the same goes for after cooking the steak while it rests. We worked so hard to get that crust, brined the steak, dried it, slowly brought it to a low temperature, then seared it. But in the end, we simply wrapped it in foil and negated all our efforts. As soon as you wrap it up, all the moisture that should evaporate stays inside, thereby softening our crust. I understand that this was invented so that the steak reaches the necessary temperature. But in fact, it often does more harm than good. It's enough just to put the steak on a cutting board or even better on a cooling rack. This way air will flow around it from all sides and prevent the moisture and juice from remaining on the crust, softening it. Now you can run to the store for a pair of ribeyes and try cooking them using these new techniques. Avoid these mistakes and your steak will turn out significantly better. However, there are still a few critical mistakes you need to avoid, as well as some handy life hacks that will simply turn your steak phenomenal. Jump into this video right here and learn if grill marks ruin your steak or make it better. Peace. Wait, are you still here? What are you waiting for? Go check this video now!